Hi, my name is Kleiko and I help people through existential transformation. At the age of 13, I became obsessed with existential questions. What is truth? Why does anything exist at all? And what's the difference between objectivity and subjectivity? I thought I was going deep into the nature of reality to figure out what is the truth of it all. Which I was, but I was also destroying myself. I call this truth seeker syndrome, or also intellectual truth seeker syndrome. You think yourself into meaninglessness and cause all sorts of dissatisfaction. And what's crazy about that is that the problem isn't that truth doesn't exist. There are meaningful answers to these existential questions. Even if you've been looking your entire life for a satisfying answer to all of this pondering and philosophizing, you come to a point where you realize there are actual answers within reason, but the existential dissatisfaction isn't solved by finding answers. The problem is that you don't recognize the truth of the answers when they are right in front of you. Because it's not about some abstract truth, right? It's that you're looking for something that makes you feel meaningful. It is supposed to be a meaningful pursuit. And when truth or an answer doesn't give you this feeling of satisfaction, you keep thinking and seeking for some other solution, some other way to perceive your life. And it sounds like such a meaningful pursuit, right? Like I want to know the truth. Like I want to know, not to think or believe, but to know what is this reality that we're in right now. Like what's the point of any of this? But my question for you is, how are you supposed to know anything if all you do is question the answers? What truth could possibly be satisfying if you can always ask why to whatever your mind comes up with? Truth can be satisfying, and truth can be certain even, but as long as you are doubtful, it won't ever be. And the doubt doesn't relate to how likely is it to be true, because the truth is actually very much unlikely, but it relates to something way more profound and deeper within you. So let me tell you what this actually is, like this pursuit for truth, and what it is actually pointing to, and why you can't stop thinking about the nature of reality. The question of truth becomes a question of epistemology, which is questioning the nature of knowledge itself. Or it can also be about metaphysics, like what lies beyond the physical plane, what governs physical laws. To find the answers to such things in an existentially satisfying way is where the path becomes spiritual for most people sooner rather than later. And there's an odd relationship now where spiritual concepts become meshed together with philosophical intellectual thinking, which actually by most sects back in the day used to be quite frowned upon. Like a lot of Buddhists didn't like when philosophers came with the philosophical questions into their monasteries, because very often they start to derail with the mind the silent truth of it all. But at the end, I am very certain that it all is supposed to lead to the same place, the same ancient wisdom. So giving the intellectual mind something to create coherence with, I do think helps, especially if you are intellectually inclined, as I've always been. I know people who got into meditation and got instructed by some Buddhist master that they should never think about what experiences they're having in meditation and just go through the entire process without ever intellectualizing it. But in my experience, this causes more problems than good, because what tends to happen is that when you never actually think about the content of your meditation, then you get stuck in, very traumatic experiences you don't find your way out of. Like I know somebody who had horrible visions of, child molestation that kept happening to him in his meditation sessions, and they didn't stop ever. And then moving out of these experiences certainly needs some form of intellectualization or some rationale to understand where it is coming from, and just going through it on some hardcore meditation way where you never actually ponder what this is pointing to with words, I find this not very helpful, or might actually be harmful. This anti-intellectualism that you can find in spiritual communities is something that I never liked. And the reason why I never actually felt identified with spirituality as a whole, when I had, all my my seeker syndromes on display. So words help us organize things in our mind, and they help us make sense of things. But this existential problem that I've solved is hiding behind the intellectualizations. The intellectual obsession is a symptom of something much more profound. So for me, it started at the age of 13, where I got very depressed, and I started my relentless obsession with philosophical thinking. I like to call it hyperphilosophia. What I did is I tried to rationalize the extent of my own dissatisfaction with life and pain and just myself. Because on one hand, the feeling that I'm miserable and depressed and I really didn't want to live was awful on its own. But then there was also this intellectual empathy component that thought, wait, if this is the depth of all the pain that I'm going through and it is this strong just for me as a person, then how is it like for the rest of the world? What is the implication here for all the suffering that exists in this planet? It seems way too brutal to accept as just something okay. Like, it very much seems like it is objectively wrong to exist. So there's the issue that then the intellectual or philosophical mind tries to resolve. It wants to find some sort of math equation that makes all the amount of pain not be as bad. But the more you think about it philosophically, the more you think about pain in the grand scheme of things, it becomes just worse and worse. And you see that reality holds an infinite potential for suffering. So there's this depth of your own personal pain that then gets philosophized into a grander narrative, trying to see the themes of the cosmos and life and why does anything exist at all. And it all becomes larger than itself, or larger than yourself. So words like truth, reality, existence, cosmos, they are all words that go beyond the individual self, trying to understand whatever is that lies beyond that created anything in the first place. I personally lost my belief in God also around this age, like around my teenage years, which for a short while helped to understand what truth is or how science works and the importance of scientific understanding. But then it also made me feel very much meaningless and worse over the years, because there was no morality, no watcher, no other being that was loving who could hold me, how Christianity did, or at least tried to do. So from there stems a sense of meaning paralysis, where science can tell you how things work and why things work, but also just on a superficial level, or not in the existentially satisfying way. Like these are the answers that are just not satisfying, where you want to find something beyond the superficial. And I couldn't really do anything, because when I tried to have some plans for my life or some sort of future thinking, I always kept wondering what's the point. So I felt paralyzed in my own body, in my own life, because there are so many humans. And from there stems the idea, what does it matter what I do? Like, if I die, well, okay, my family will clearly be sad and they will care. But beyond that, does it really matter? Like, it is impossible to math it out again and then see how you are supposed to have any impact in this world in a meaningful way, or what a meaning could even possibly mean in a universe so vast. So this line of thinking became the inability to enjoy things at face value. Everything must always be connected to some larger truth or framework to be worth doing. And then I couldn't do anything except, play video games. Video games were actually very easy to get lost in. So from this also stemmed the sense of isolation. Like, I couldn't believe people don't experience the world how I saw it. I remember being the quiet kid in class, and just seeing other people laugh and talk about ordinary things, about playing football in cars and what they will be doing this weekend, and I couldn't feel anything about it. I felt a huge disconnect between the depth of my existence and what I was seeing in other people. Like, they seemed also superficial in my eyes, not really concerned about the deep nature of reality or whatever. And the fact that they didn't acknowledge or couldn't see how sick this world was, or how bad I felt, was for me evidence that I discovered something deep and real and truthful in the darkness of it all, and they were deluded by their own happiness. When I used to ride the bus back home, I was always listening to sad existential music, or very aggressive music. I was very obsessed with Radiohead for a while, but I also listened to a lot of German rap, and I was quite of a music nerd. I got very much lost in the music and soaked myself into the melancholy and sadness of existence with it. I always had this lingering feeling of melancholy all the time, and I felt like I was almost always sad, or sad was like the go-to mood that I was stuck in. And then the intellectual loops sometimes helped me escape from this overwhelming sadness. Like, I felt comfort in being able to disassociate a bit from the world through music and philosophical thinking. So disassociation is actually a huge topic that I will make my next video about, so subscribe to not miss that. I also suffered from extreme insomnia, as my mind usually started to spiral at night about death and the lack of meaning, and how I really, really did not want to wake up the next morning. I just couldn't believe that I have to go through all this life, like all these years that are ahead of me, and I wasn't even an adult at that time. And I always imagined being like 30 or 40 and still feeling this way, and I was just like, I didn't ask to be born. This is not worth it. Why do I have to do any of this? And I remember always zooming in and out into details or inconveniences that I hated about life or about my life, and then zooming out into the infinite vast cosmos of the universe, imagining how many of these little annoyances exist at scale. And then from there, it became about suffering and all of that jazz. Time was also a topic of intense discussion in my head. Like, what is time? What am I now? Who was I yesterday? What is it? And why can't I grasp what time is? Like, why can I not hold it? It used to drive me a bit crazy, even at an early age. Like, I couldn't orient myself across time and space, and I really wanted to somehow understand, where am I at? It's like I got very, very deep into the nature of impermanence from a young age. The realization that all things change constantly and that you cannot really locate yourself. But I couldn't accept to the extent that this was true, and I needed to find myself somehow. And it was like I could notice that if I have an experience that was pleasant, where I laughed with somebody or had like a nice time, 10 minutes after it was over, and then I wondered, did it actually even happen? Or is it now just a memory, and even all memories fade away? So then I felt that the present moment of experience is evidence that everything is so meaningless, because nothing lasts longer than a second, and it's not graspable, and you cannot hold it. So it further, through this filter that I had at the time, seemed like evidence of objective meaninglessness. From there then also came a temporal disassociation, where my mind started to exist more in memory than in reality, thinking about better times when I was like a kid, and thinking about when I can go home and finally play video games again, and then just heavy rumination about all awkward and stressful conversations I've ever had in my life, from the past or which I might have in the future. So it was very much hell in my mind. This is just a small overview of my teen years, and thankfully this changed with further development and understanding of myself and reality. And not all of it was awful. I had days where I felt relatively normal, but then from one day to another, I suddenly felt into this deep pit of sadness about the nature of it all again. If you think about everything that I've told you about these existential problems and about wanting to understand the nature of reality and the nature of the universe and all of this stuff, the problem isn't really about that, right? Like the problem is externalized. And what I was actually struggling with is the nature of identity. It's not just that life was meaningless, but I couldn't find meaning in my own existence. It's not that there was so much pain and so much suffering in my own life, but I was questioning and wondering about my own suffering and pain, and therefore ruminated on it and made it way, way worse and basically omnipresent just by trying to resolve it somehow. And I basically noticed that, or like looking back now, I noticed how much I created my own suffering almost because I enjoyed it, like enjoyed being in this melancholic space, in this sad space, in this contemplative space. It almost became like a zone of safety and comfort. And not that it was my fault in that sense. There were a lot of moments where I wish I wasn't sad, but I was fighting against something. And it's also not that everybody else around me was just superficial. It's that I felt disconnected from other people and I isolated myself from them in the process. Even mentally, I kind of devalued their experience or told that they are not as deep as I am or they don't feel what I feel. So I distanced myself from them. I isolated myself. And when I was being annoyed by something or depressed about what I had to do the next day, well, it became a cosmic narrative about the extent of all human suffering instead of how I relate to what I am going through. Epistemology, metaphysics, philosophy, and spirituality are all about the same thing, which is the question, who am I? And the I is such a secretive, sneaky, counterintuitive, paradoxical little thing that figuring out is very hard because it gets itself into loops and then gets stuck in these loops and it can stay there for years and years and years. And then losing these loops or recognizing that they were there in the first place can feel very almost humiliating for oneself. Just realizing in what way you actually deluded yourself and got stuck in the mind. Because the mind rebels against knowing who you are. It fights it. It wants to believe it already knows who it is. And then it starts to maybe classify itself as some label like I am intelligent, I am wise, I am stupid, I am toxic, I'm beautiful, I'm ugly, I'm unlovable, I'm wonderful. Like it doesn't really matter what qualification the mind uses, but it will use some qualification to identify itself and then it clings to this. Or like I am lazy, or I am unsuccessful, or I am just an asshole, or I've been evil, and then I am evil, and then it just gets stuck there. And then there's this deeper question, okay, I know I'm not these labels, I know I'm something deeper, profound, more profound beyond this. There also is where a lot of philosophizing starts. But deep down, it always knows that any label or any truth or any knowledge is insufficient, because how are you supposed to define something so complex? This works both for you as an individual, like how could you describe your entire life with a word? Or it also works in the cosmic scale. How are you supposed to understand the nature of reality with one word or even one sentence? How are you supposed to capture something so infinite and vast? So you end up asking the deeper questions again and again and again and again, because some wisdom knows that the questioning itself has something to it. So you know already something and you're just doubting it again and again. So what you want to do is you want to set aside the doubt, set aside the questioning, and wonder, what is it that you already know? To which extent do you already know who you are? Already know what the universe is? already know where you come from, already understand yourself. Not that you know everything there is to know, but you know a lot more about yourself with certainty than you give yourself credit for, just from how you perceive yourself to be. Not as some absolute truth or reality, but as an acknowledgement on your perception of yourself or the perception of the universe. The question you must ask yourself is, what is it that you want to know that would make it all satisfying? Or why is what you know not satisfying already? Is knowledge supposed to be satisfying, or is knowledge supposed to be about the truth? And when the truth isn't satisfying, maybe there's something else beyond just pure knowledge that is causing the problem. These are important questions to ponder that in the future I will give you more direct answers to, as this topic is much more complex. But like you can guess at this point, the answers can only really come from yourself if you want them to be satisfying. It's a process that is about self-discovery, self-understanding. And to leave you with some final food for thought, if your life is meaningless or feels dull, and you're not really feeling connected with it, you're feeling a bit disassociated from it, I know you try to think about truth and meaning and what it could be and the suffering and all of that. But how the hell are you supposed to change anything through thinking? Like, what new information will you get that would actually make a difference just through thought? Because if you have thought about this for a long while, you know that thinking is a symptom of some emotional issue or some insatisfaction that you feel. What is it that you feel that wants to be resolved? Because when you tackle that directly, then it's quite clear why the truth isn't satisfying. It's like if you have a friend, for example, or a family member die of cancer, and then you have an existentially dark moment and you ask yourself, why did this happen? What is the point of all of this? And then the doctor comes to you and starts to give you the scientific information about molecular cancer formation. Okay, so clearly you were not asking about why did this happen, because there is a pretty direct answer of why it happens. But it's not really the truth that you're looking for in that sense. It's not really the answer you're looking for, because you didn't actually care about why it had to happen in some materialistical sense or some cause and effect sense. You're making a statement about how you feel about what happened. Somewhere there in this sensation is the truth that is the answer to the question. Now, there are many philosophical frameworks and belief systems that too can help, but they're always just the cherry on top of self-discovery. So I help people with self-discovery on this channel, and if you enjoy in-depth discussions about these complex topics and you want to transform your own relationship to it, I also have a Substack where I leave my structured writings for transformation. And if you want to go in-depth about the intellectual side of why reality is like this, then watch this video next.